Alright people, this is the third part of Unit 7. I thought I had made this video once. It's on my YouTube account, but it can't be played by anybody. I even had Stephen Jones from 4th period, who's a technical guru when it comes to the YouTube world, try and help me through it, and I just couldn't make it work. So here we go. We're just going to make it again. I'll upload this as quick as I can, and hopefully it'll help you for your second day of studying. It wasn't there for your first. I apologize. Hopefully you got through okay. It's lunchtime on Tuesday. It's nice outside. Let's roll. We're on page 5 of the study guide talking about the first New Deal. We remember that Franklin Roosevelt, when he arrived in office, makes no real specific promises as to how he's going to solve the problems of the Great Depression. He does, however, make it clear that we are going to get this fixed. What that means is a broad spectrum of programs. We're going to hit things from all different angles. We're going to bring in new minds, right? The brain trust. These academics who hadn't been in Washington circles of power before are going to be looted from the nation's top universities, put into government spots, basically handed a blank budget and said, go for it. If money's not an object, and if government limitations aren't an object, how would you solve this problem? Go. And that's how we end up with the alphabet soup. We're on that chart right there. The FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, created in the early days of the New Deal to try and assure faith and security in the nation's banking system. It guaranteed your deposits to $2,500. Boom, banking's restored. People put money in banks. People then can get loans from banks. They can open businesses. They can start hiring. The faith in the nation's financial system is restored. Booyah! Number 2, the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. Outdoor work for young men. Go sing a song, take your shirt off, rake some leaves. Yeah! Have some fun out there, gentlemen. Criticisms. They were segregated. There was a white and a black CCC, and there's also no girl CCC, right? There's no she. Number 3, the AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, which created false shortages by, in essence, paying farmers not to produce as much as they had produced. Farmers are one of those 6 sectors of the economy from the Great Depression. How do we solve that? We tell farmers, listen, you cannot produce more than that much. We'll pay you not to produce more than that much. And then we can jack the price up and make sure that the prices make farmers enough money. Criticisms, they destroyed a lot of crops in the early days, and also this one was thrown out by the Supreme Court because it was seen as too much government involvement in the economy. Boom, gone. The FERA, my phone's ringing, I'm going to keep going. The Federal Emergency Relief Administration, the FERA's goal was to hand out money, flat give people money and tell them to go and spend it. Gave out billions of dollars to try and create pump priming from the bottom of the economy, getting people to spend as much money as possible. Go ahead. The PWA and the CWA, the Public Works Administration and the Civil Works Administration, are both work programs dedicated to try and do infrastructure work for the American economy. That means getting people back to work, building railroads, bridges, schools, hospitals, all of these things that are going to make the infrastructure of the United States a better thing. Over time, those are all going to be morphed out into the large organization, the WPA. Criticisms, is this essential work? Is this something we really need? Or is this something that we're just going to do as a way to try and put people back into work? By this point, people are looking at Roosevelt going, very interesting. These are solutions no one had considered before. Hoover hadn't thought of doing these things because Hoover didn't think it was the government's job to push the economy. What Roosevelt is doing is highly controversial and, in many ways, something that we still do today. Let's flip the page. Opposition. I said a second ago that the Supreme Court's one of the big opposition votes here. The Supreme Court believes that what Roosevelt is doing is too much government. That when we look at something like the AAA, it is not the business of the government to set a price for a commodity. It is not the business of the government to pay someone not to produce a commodity. And so organizations like the AAA got thrown out by a highly conservative Supreme Court. Think about it. The 3 presidents prior to Franklin Roosevelt, Hoover, Coolidge, and Harding, all Republicans, and between the 3 of them had really put most of those justices on the bench. So there's these solid core of conservatives that Roosevelt keeps getting programs knocked out by. We'll see these guys later on, right? These are the guys that Roosevelt's going to try and help them out because they're so overworked. Hey, you sneaky bugger, FDR. Francis Townsend. Townsend's a Long Beach physician who's looking at Franklin Roosevelt saying, what do you got for old people? What do you got for old people? There's nothing. I can't get a CCC job. I can't go out and get a CWA or a PWA job. I can't work. So Townsend's going to encourage Roosevelt to start investing in a policy of trying to get pensions for old people. More radical, Huey Long. Huey Long's in charge of what we call the Share Our Wealth program. Let's tax the highest incomes in America at ultra high rates. You get over $1 million a year, every cent you get goes to the American taxpayer funds. If you make over $10 million in an inheritance, that's as much as you can get. I don't care if you inherited Cornelius Vanderbilt's money. $10 million, that's yours. The rest goes to the American taxpayers, and we're going to split it up equally. Now, this is highly popular, obviously, in a time with 25% unemployment. A plan that's Robin Hooding the nation's finances, that's popular. But the finances really never made that much sense. Had Huey Long not got shot, though, in 1935, a lot of people think he could have given Roosevelt a run for his money in 36. Didn't happen, though. The second New Deal. So if the first New Deal is about trying to directly solve the problems of the Great Depression, then the second New Deal is this attempt to say, how do we make sure we never end up here again? It's more long-term. It's more about reform of the financial and the economic system in the U.S. Let's go. The Wagner Act. The Wagner Act gives collective bargaining to labor unions. In other words, it gives them the right to sit down at a table and to negotiate. Think back to how we treated unions in the past. Homestead, the Pullman incident. In both cases, the federal government or the state government in the Homestead situation came in and broke the strike by cracking down on strikers. This is labor sitting at a table with business and having an equal spot. In that way, Franklin Roosevelt is the biggest fan of labor unions of any president we've had so far. The Social Security Act. Oh, I skipped the Fair Labor Standards Act. It instituted the first minimum wage, 25 cents an hour, 44 hours a week. Now it's, I don't know, it's like $3,000 an hour. I'm kidding, it's not, but it's higher. Social Security. We're listening to Townsend here a little bit, right? Roosevelt begins a program called Social Security that takes workers' contributions and their employers' contributions over the course of their working career, and then when they reach a certain age, 65 let's say, it pays them back that money in a pension. Make sure that if you've lived a good, hard, long life, you don't sit there eating cat food for the better years of your life. That kind of stuff happens. You read about it in the papers. I'm not making up cat food. It's there. Okay? Works Progress Administration, the largest of the government programs. At one time, 1 in 5 Americans worked for the WPA in some way or another. Massive building projects, but also things like the Federal Writers Project, the Federal Theaters Project, the Federal Music Project, to make sure that the culture of America stayed alive. This is the program that in 1937, Roosevelt's going to start to cut, and then the economy goes, bam! Which makes sense, right? If the government employs 1/5 of all Americans in that particular industry, in that organization, and then you take it away, that dog can't hunt. The Revenue Act of 36, sometimes called the Soak the Rich Plan. Roosevelt turned the dogs on some of his former colleagues and friends in the wealthy classes of America and hammered them with 75% income taxes. Employers who were already upset about things like collective bargaining with the Wagner Act and Social Security contributions are now going to have to pay high taxes. And they're looking at Roosevelt going, what happened? I thought you were one of us. You're not. Okay. Moving on, members of the Roosevelt Coalition. When Roosevelt does win in 1936 and wins going away like Secretariat, okay, going away in 1936, he takes with him this new block of voters who become the core of the Democratic Party. African Americans right at the top of that list. They used to vote for Republicans, but the New Deal switches that. Women, Jews, Catholics, intellectuals, progressives, this whole group of people, Hispanics as well, who prior to this may not have been strong every time for the Democrats, become big Democratic blocs. The Republican Party is going to have to figure out how to woo some of those blocs back over time. But that victory does some things to Roosevelt. Number one, it kind of gets him a little cocky. And so he returns with this court packing scheme. The goal of the court packing scheme is to dilute that conservative mindset of the Supreme Court, to get rid of some of those justices who, quite frankly, have been too conservative for Roosevelt. So, this is not what he's going to say on paper, though, right? What Roosevelt's going to say is, wow, these poor guys are over 70 years old and we're working them too hard. Okay. So, he institutes this plan, or proposes a plan, I should say, where he would be able to replace one justice or add, I should say, not replace, add 1 justice for every justice over the age of 70. That's 6 of the 9 justices on the bench. That would increase the number of justices on the bench to 15. He already has really 4 liberal voices on the bench. That's 10 people who are going to vote with him, 5 who've been voting against him. Game over. Right? He just swung the Supreme Court his way. Now, what people really did was they saw through this and they said, come on now, Franklin, that's not the way you play. And as a result of it, he lost some popularity. What's even more damning, though, is the double-dip depression of 37 and 38. When Roosevelt removed money from the WPA and began to turn down government spending, he thought that private sector jobs and private sector spending would keep the economy afloat. It didn't. Double-dip recession. The economy had been down, it starts to go up again, and then bam, down again. Let's talk about how each of these groups fared under the New Deal. Labor. Labor really benefits more than anybody else. Collective bargaining, the minimum wage, okay, a real seat at the table in the society. Now, they don't take over the factories. If you're looking for socialism, it's not going to happen here, but it's pretty big. Women. Women get a lot of New Deal jobs. They don't get as many jobs as would be proportional in society. This is still a society that believes that if women have a job, we really should look at whether or not a man should have that job. Let's make sure that all of the men, the providers in the household in that sense, the heads of household, have jobs before we start thinking about jobs for women. African Americans. Big New Deal aid, as with Hispanics as well. Both groups become highly political and highly involved in the evolution here of the new Democratic Party. If you're an African American, probably in those cities, aid programs in the past just hadn't gotten you money before, or in the South either. This is an attempt to try and improve that. Native Americans, a mixed bag here. To the credit of Franklin Roosevelt, he tries to reverse a lot of the Dawes Act. Remember, the Dawes Act is a late 19th century act that tried to un-native the Native Americans, tried to make them into people who did not have tribal dress and tribal culture and all of these things. And now we're going to try and reverse that and push the diversity and the individuality of those cultures while at the same time promoting self-rule among Native American groups. A lot of talk, not enough money, generally speaking. Big trends of this whole chart. Number 1, Roosevelt's not really about civil rights here. He's about, let's solve the Depression. So if you're looking for a president who's going to stand up and say, I'm for equality first and foremost, let's use the government to create that in a civil rights or gender issue sense, that's not going to happen. That is not what Franklin Roosevelt is there to do. Okay? Goals of the TVA. The Tennessee Valley Authority is a massive building and then maintenance program intended to create dams on the Tennessee River and use the hydroelectric power from those dams to electrify a highly impoverished region of America, right? This is a pocket of America that doesn't have much electricity, and now we're going to give them dam electricity. We're going to make sure that they increase the dam quality of their lives. You got to do that. If you don't do that, what's the point? Okay? Legacies of the New Deal. A few of them. We talked about these in class. It increases the overall involvement of the government in your life. It increases the size of the federal bureaucracy. It increases the notion that the president is the center of all things. We don't look to the Congress. We don't look to the courts. We say the president is the reason for our failures or is the reason for our successes. All dangerous trends, by the way. And it also increases the idea that we should go with Keynesian economics. Keynes had said that if you're in an economic moment like the Depression, the key is not to get conservative and tighten things, as Hoover did, but to do what Roosevelt does, to flood the gates, start spending. The government should flood money in, and that way spending will take place. Now, Mr. Keynes, isn't there going to be inflation? Yes, right? In the long run, there will be inflation, but remember what Keynes said about the long run. We're all dead in the long run. Okay. All right, so that's the third part. I apologize it wasn't there yesterday, ladies and gentlemen. I thought it was, and when I looked there, it is there, and it just doesn't work, unfortunately. So this one I'm going to upload as quick as I can. Hope you're all having a good day. Enough.